Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod, and this is Star Wars 7x7. We're at episode number 1698, and thank you so much for joining me for it. Thank you so much for subscribing to the show. Thank you so much also to all the patrons who are helping to make this possible at patreon.com/SW7x7. Yes, I'm still coming at you from Times Square in New York City. You can have a look down behind me if you're watching the video version of this. And, we are just going to jump right into the show, which is the second half of my conversation with composer Ryan Shore. He is the gentleman who's scoring Galaxy of Adventures, and before that, Forces of Destiny, the two Star Wars animated cartoon series that have premiered on YouTube, and you've actually seen Forces of Destiny possibly on the Disney Channel as well. Galaxy of Adventures is his new and current project for Lucasfilm, and there's other stuff that he's doing with Lucasfilm as well, and we're going to get into a lot of that stuff and how he is doing the amazing job that he's doing, which is rather more complicated than it might seem at first blush in the rest of the conversation. I hope you enjoy it, and I'll say this right now because we're going to sign out at the end of the interview, so I'll just simply say for the moment, may the Force be with you wherever in the world you may be, and let's get to the rest of my conversation with Ryan Shore. And do you find that's had an influence on the way that you end up conducting? And I guess that sort of opens up the question as well as to how the music is created for Forces of Destiny and Galaxy of Adventures as well, because I imagine it's probably not necessarily on the same scale as it would be for a feature film production, but maybe I'm mistaken and you can set me straight on that.
Sure. Well, actually, the scores that I have written for Forces of Destiny and am now writing for Galaxy of Adventures are very much cut from that same type of cloth that Williams. He's created the indelible music language of the Star Wars universe. With his iconic themes and also with just his overall musical vocabulary. Just by being inspired by so much music that has occurred, prior. For me, that's a massive influence. And we do those scores actually with the same scope and breadth of the orchestra and choir. So it's very much, in that, vocabulary of Star Wars.
Got it. And to ask this question, we are moving into a space where I am not necessarily as literate, and so I will, in advance, thank you for helping me along and the rest of our listeners along as well. But when it comes to John Williams, his music, as I've read analyses here and there, I've heard the phrase creative paraphrasing, like taking the works of luminaries like Holst or Strauss or Stravinsky or Wagner, and having things that are similar, but being able to vary elements of them and make them his own. And is that something that you've seen in your own analysis of his work, and how does that translate, if it does, to the way that you approach doing the work for, say, Galaxy of Adventures? Is that kind of a way in which you could look at Williams's work and interpreting it for the purposes of these shorts, and how much of it is your own composition just outright?
Sure. So when I'm writing for these series, I'm not consciously thinking about other composers like Holst or Strauss or Stravinsky and Wagner. However, we're all inspired by and learn from the music masters, and we stand on their shoulders. So even though I'm not really thinking specifically like, what would Holst write in this moment? I think it would be pretty difficult to just escape, or why would we want to escape, all of that, all that brilliance, that has come before. Certainly for Force of Destiny and Galaxy Adventures, I continue creating from within that language, but at the same time, I'm of course composing from my own experiences. Every composer has their own sensibilities. Williams is a massive influence on me, as are many other composers. But I've studied John's music at great length. I've had the great fortune of conducting some of his music in concert, and so I know the music really well, and I'm certain that absolutely has an influence on me while I'm writing. And then it's interesting on Forces of Destiny, like the directive that I've been given on each series is a little different. So on Star Wars Forces of Destiny, I used John Williams themes for any times those characters, and obviously all those themes have already been established. And so I would use those themes. However, all the music, I wrote all the music originally, and I would just quote his themes at the times that it was appropriate to do so. Mm-hmm. Galaxy of Adventures is a little different, because Galaxy of Adventures is each of the shorts are essentially like recreations from the original films, where they might show a scene from one of the films or a character. It's not necessarily recreated exactly like shot for shot, where it's like frame specific, but Galaxy of Adventures will take scenes and then from previous films, and also will use original dialogue from the movies. So on Galaxy Adventures, there aren't new actors that are speaking the lines. If you hear Han, it's Harrison Ford,
right?
And if you hear Leia, it's Carrie Fisher. And so they wanted to do that with the music as well. So there are times where we're actually using recordings, John's music from the movies, the actual recordings. And then there are times where I'm composing original music, and sometimes it's weaving between the two. And so that's one of the challenges on the series, is how to make that all sound hopefully seamless. And there are some episodes where it's entirely original by me. There are some episodes where it's a mix of the two. And hopefully when they're heard, hopefully the audience is not able to tell. Hopefully it just sounds like one cohesive score.
Yeah, I've watched just about all of them, and I'm amazed at how seamless the experience is. So I'm not surprised to hear that there is, some original stuff blended in, and I'm a bit surprised, and hopefully this comes across in a polite way, that there is a selection that have totally original music in it, because I would not have been able to tell the difference. So, I mean, that, to me at least, says that what you're composing is right, on, the same caliber and, in the same, feel as what Williams himself is composing. So, I love the idea also that you would bring your own experience and your own intuition into this as well. And I'm sure you are, but it still all feels very much like Star Wars.
Well, that's a great, I accept that as a great compliment, because that's exactly what I work on every day is to hopefully make that sound in like you've described, that it all sounds like it's one cohesive, underscore. So thank you.
So how does the process work generally, like for Galaxy of Adventures, just in terms of, each episode? There have been, I think, something like, I want to say it's about 17 episodes that have been released so far. Mm-hmm. And, composing for just 1 minute, or, composing along with, blending and weaving for 1 minute, you would think on the one hand, it's just a minute, but I imagine that it's almost even more challenging because it's only a minute long. Can you talk about the process of, where you come in on a given episode of Galaxy of Adventures, and how your involvement starts and what happens?
Sure. So I see the episodes before they are locked. They'll share with me works in progress so that I can begin to see what the episodes are about, and let them ruminate and gestate and process within me. And then and eventually, of course, they lock the picture when it's ready for scoring, and we do a spotting session, which is where I meet with the producers and the directors and the creators of the episodes, and we talk about them, and we talk about what type of music we should have and what the role of the music will be in the episode. If we'll have music throughout the entire episode or not, or if it's only going to be in certain places. We talk about exactly where it should start and where it will end. It's interesting what you mentioned about the lengths of the episodes. That actually is really a challenge. When an episode is only a minute long, or sometimes they're longer than that, sometimes they're a little shorter than that, it sort of presents its own challenge because like an episode might be an action sequence or might have an action sequence in it. And then before you know it, the episode is done. So it's kind of a challenge that you're sort of ramping up and getting into something, but you still need to make it feel like you didn't just sort of end abruptly.
Right.
that it didn't sound like hacked off or something like that.
Right.
So we give a lot of thought, to how to hopefully make that feel like a cohesive story unto itself. So that's pretty much the process, and then I'll write the music and send it to them, and they'll review it, and if they have comments, then I'll make updates, and we'll just collaborate back and forth until the music is approved.
And then when you have to go in for situations where some of the music for a given episode has to be performed originally, as opposed to using John Williams's recordings. Once it's approved, then you have to go into a recording studio with the full orchestra?
No. On Galaxy of Adventures, I actually do the original composing in my own studio, and I don't record it live.
So are you? Does that mean that you are playing all the instruments for all intents and purposes? And that feels like a stupid question in my mouth, and I'm sorry.
Not at all. Yes, essentially, I am performing all the instruments. However, I'm not necessarily performing them like I'm not taking a cello out of its case, out of the closet and warming it up, putting the rosin on the bow and setting up a mic.
Right.
I do it within all of my gear. I have a very large setup for, with a lot of extremely high quality sounds that I can compose with. And so that's actually another aspect of these projects is I work really hard to make sure that all of that sounds hopefully as absolutely live as possible, especially because I'm editing sometimes or transitioning between my music and original recordings. So that adds sort of an additional challenge into it. I find that if you do a score completely, if I do a score completely in my studio, I work really hard to make sure it sounds live, but if you're not hearing it against another live recording, there can sometimes be a bit of a suspension of disbelief, where you didn't have something to compare it against. Hopefully it sounds live unto itself. But as soon as you play another live recording next to it, you kind of have to work all that much harder to make sure that, this stuff sounds real. Because if you transition back and forth, it could be a giveaway. But I work really hard to make sure that hopefully never sounds that way.
Actually, it makes what you're doing sound even more impressive, considering how seamless it sounds when you actually watch the videos.
Thank you. Yeah, it's something I work really, really hard to do, and it's something I would do anyway. I of course want the music to sound as great as it hopefully can, but it's definitely an extra challenge on this one.
So that means that you also have to have, access to the recordings from the soundtracks at kind of a deeper level. Like you're not just dealing with a CD or listening to it on Spotify and doing this, right? I mean, you actually have more detailed breakdowns of these recordings, I would imagine. Not
necessarily, because when you record an orchestra live and everyone's in the room and all the microphones are up, you don't really have separation of the individual parts. I mean, yes, there may be microphones right over the brass, and there may be other microphones right over the strings, but just to make an example,
Mm-hmm.
But they're all in one room, and when the trumpets start playing, their sound is going to be picked up in every microphone in the entire room.
Okay. Yeah.
So even though the strings, are primarily getting the strings, they're totally getting, brass and woodwinds, and certain instruments cut through more than others. One trumpet played really loudly could obliterate an entire orchestra. You could have an entire orchestra going nuts, and you could have one piccolo that is playing above everything, and you can hear it clearly because certain instruments just resonate in that way. So if I'm using original recordings from the 1970s or the 80s, there really aren't stems, as we would call them, or stripes or splits or whatever you might want to call it. It's really just like you have the final recording that would be on the soundtrack. So you have to be very creative on how to edit with that material if I'm going to use any of that, because if I'm going to use a section that's within a piece of music, I may not have a clean intro or ending on that to work with. And so I have to, find ways of being very creative to seamlessly go in and out of those pieces.
And would I be correct in imagining that, part of the blending challenge also is the fact that when you are composing and you're creating the music in your studio, you don't necessarily have the benefit of having multiple instruments playing at the same time and being able to be caught on different microphones around the whole space. And so that creates sort of a sonic challenge for you as well?
Very insightful. That's a very insightful question, and that's entirely true. All of these sounds that composers use in their studios to replicate real instruments, those sounds are constantly evolving to sound more and more real. And some of the things that I concentrate on is making sure that all the instruments are seated in the correct positions in the speakers, so that if you would set up the orchestra where you have your first violins on the left, and if you're going to do split strings and you're going to do second violins on the right, or maybe you're going to keep first and second violins together on the left, and you're going to have brass on the back right and percussion along the back, and these are all placements of instruments. And in order to sound realistic, I concentrate a lot on that, to make sure that everyone is virtually seated properly, within the space, and that way they blend together properly, as though it was recorded live with the right setup.
That in itself sounds so incredibly fascinating, and I would love to grill you more on that. I think I will have to save it for another time, because I know that I need to be able to let you go to your next appointments. And so obviously you've got more with Galaxy of Adventures that's coming out this year. And do you want to talk a little bit more about that, and also any other projects that you might have coming up that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Sure. Actually, another project that I'm doing is related to Galaxy of Adventures. So there is the Star Wars Galaxy of Adventures series that we're doing,
Mm-hmm.
and there's also an adjacent series, which is called Star Wars Galaxy of Adventures Fun Facts.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe the Fun Facts episodes can be found on YouTube, and I'm scoring them as well. I'm doing both series at the same time, and the Fun Facts series is actually very different musically. If you go to check them out, I don't do them with an orchestra. They're just a completely different musical approach entirely. Like, I use a lot of synth-based sounds and non-acoustic type sounds. So that's another series that I'm doing at the same time. And there's an animated film that I recently scored, and I'm so proud of it. It's called The Legend of Muay Thai Nine Satra. And it's an animated feature film made in Thailand. And it's a 96-minute animated feature, and I wrote a 96-minute orchestral score for it, recorded live, plus an original pop song that I did. Actually, I did two versions of that song. The song is called The Love I Never Knew, and one version of it is in a montage in the film, which is sort of an orchestral treatment of that song. And then there's another version of that song in the end of the movie, in the end credits, which is a top 40 version of that song. The movie has been playing already overseas in Southeast Asia primarily, and should be coming out in the United States hopefully later this year. So I'm just waiting to hear what will be happening with it. But I'm so proud of that film as well.
That's excellent. And congratulations on that too. Is there anywhere that we can go online to find out more information about it? And also anywhere that you would like listeners and viewers here to connect with you online or to follow more of your exploits as they're happening?
I believe that there are some trailers, maybe teasers for The Legend of Muay Thai Nine Satra, which I'm sure can be found maybe on YouTube or, I think they have a website, probably Facebook as well, and other social media platforms. And then for myself, my website is ryanshore.com. And I try to keep active on Facebook and Twitter. And as of this week, I am now delving into Instagram.
Excellent.
I believe that my handles on all of those social media platforms like Twitter and Instagram is Ryan Shore, all lowercase, no spaces. And on Facebook is Ryan Shore Music.
Got it. And I will include links to all of those in our show notes for this episode as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
Ryan, thank you so very much. You've been so generous with your time and your insights and sharing what's going on behind the scenes as you develop Galaxy of Adventures and Forces of Destiny before it. Again, thank you so much for your time, and I wish you greater and continued success with Lucasfilm and your projects outside of it, and can't wait to see what else is going to develop with you.
Thank you so much, Alan. It was really an honor to be on your show, and I really appreciate you asking me to do it.
This podcast is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox. It is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other related Star Wars items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyright 2019 by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.